It is with great excitement I introduce our next speaker, Kendrick Davis. Kendrick is an associate professor and chief research officer at the USC Race and Equity Center at the University of Southern California. A mechanical engineer and roboticist by training, his research interrogates the intersections of education and science. Prior to USC, Kendrick was an American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, Congressional Fellow in the United States Senate. Additionally, Dr. Davis has been an education and science policy advisor for local, state, and national governments. Thank you so much for being here today, Kendrick.
Thank you all so much for having me, and happy Friday to everyone. I appreciate the invitation, first of all. Second of all, appreciate the opportunity to speak and be in conversation about such important topics with you all. And thirdly, just wonderful to be able to connect with Jude and QSide on some of the work you all have been doing and continue to do. And so what I would love to do today, and thank you for that introduction. I'm Kendrick. I'm a research professor at USC, teaching the schools of education and public policy, but I'm an engineer and roboticist by training. And it's important that I say those things and bring them into the conversation because they tie part and parcel into the work I'm going to be talking about today, and sort of how I sort of vision and what my perspective on the world is. And so what I thought before getting into some slides, and hopefully I have screen sharing capabilities, but what I thought would be helpful was just to like share a little bit of my background and what brought me to this work, sort of how, like, why are we talking about, what brought me to the work where we're sort of marrying science, STEM education, science policy, and equity in the same conversation. And there might reasonably be some questions, and there always is, about, well, how do those three things actually work together? Do they work together well? But more importantly, how do you bring other people into that space of asking important and meaningful questions that are really going to push the conversation forward? And so maybe actually what I should start with is share my screen, and we'll kind of go through the abstract, or go through what the title of the talk is and what I hope to for us to accomplish in our time together. So I believe you all can see my screen. Please yell loud if you cannot. I know it's coming up.
Okay, we got you.
Perfect. All right. So, move these things out of my way. So how can we, the overall question is, how can we harness the power of data science to drive more equitable decision-making in public policy and education in ways that dramatically improve outcomes for racially minoritized individuals? And we'll talk about how that dramatic part is really important because we've always been really good at making incremental change. The question is, can we sort of move beyond that? Why use race as an organizing principle for equitable decision-making? Well, data science is an incredibly powerful tool, which you all know plenty about, that can be used to explore the intersection of these questions. This session will explore the process of deriving equity-minded, researchable data science questions that both confront complexity, but also give us some practical ways to moving forward. And so I'll continue with kind of introducing you to what sort of brought me and Drew together, and Chad and the QSide team. And so the Walmart Foundation is supporting a project focused on prevention, criminal justice reform, but from a prevention lens, specifically focused on racial equity. And so part of what we were tasked with, or myself and my team at the USC Race and Equity Center, is tasked with coming up with building a sort of national network of researchers, sort of policymakers, advocates, those who are really leveraging research to move some of these conversations along in criminal justice reform, with a particular focus on prevention, because that is the best and fastest way of sort of cutting off the pipeline of individuals, particularly of color, Black and marginalized individuals, going to the criminal justice system. But as a way to, even if we have effective programs for intervention and aftercare, we really want to stop individuals from going into systems we know produce harm and produce trauma that we then have to use public policy dollars to correct and ameliorate later. And so one of the, we've been working on this project over the last several months, but one of the things that became clear and what was really important to us is that we not just go over the same well-worn and well-washed areas of, well, what is the environment, youth diversion programs, getting people connected to social services, because again, those are the things that we know only contribute to incremental change. We really wanted to get at how do we use this project and this process to get at the process of systems change. And it's that systems change piece that really brought in the data science. And I want to say, I know data science is a broad field. There are lots of different things you can and will do, lots of different things we have and can and will do. But when I say we brought in data science, what I mean is we brought in the power of using sort of like large bodies of data, statistical techniques, the whole, AI, machine learning in terms of vision, AI, machine learning, all of the tools we know that have been developed and they have high degrees of technical feasibility, but sometimes sort of low degrees of equitable implementation. And so we embarked on like part of the project of bringing data science, or continue to bring data science into this criminal justice conversation as it pertains to racial equity, as it pertains to prevention. And this wasn't part of my formal talk, but I'm going to run through some examples of, well, here are some education, and since our project is focused on prevention of criminal justice spaces, often operationalized in education, K-12, higher ed. If you think about it this way, that where did we and where do your children spend most of their time? Often, sometimes more than their family, in school. And so these are environments where you're being socialized, you're coming into contact with schools, where is an environment where students often come into contact with people, programs, policies, a lot of things at the intersection of really helping them flourish and develop as individuals, or that can really put some important obstacles in the way. And so in this education conversation, I was the first science, technology, engineering, math, or STEM director for the city of Philadelphia. There was some really wonderful movement that happened in STEM in the Obama administration, and that spurred into cities, large cities, small cities of different sizes. But Philadelphia is one of the cities that stepped up and made an investment into actually having a position in city government that was related to understanding, coordinating, advising, and really creating structure around STEM programs in the 5th largest city in the country. And one of the things that became clear was that education was out. When you come into a position that's never been created before, right, you have to make it whatever it is. And one of the things that became clear was there's a lot of STEM and science things going on, but we don't have the data. There are a lot of wonderful things happening that we'd love to uplift, but we don't have the data. And one of the projects I found myself being involved in was reshaping the educational environment of a school in supporting reshaping the educational environment of a school in Southwest Philadelphia, for a few reasons. One, Southwest Philadelphia is one of the places that has the highest sort of confluence of environmental hazards and different types of environmental hazards. So we were looking at ways, how do we employ science and manufacturing to improve the learning environment? What would, if we cut down on the noise, if we put in new and better windows, we cut down on the noise, how would that improve the learning environment? How would that improve the student experience? And right before, about an hour ago, I was reading this new reporting about, so that was clear some environmental issues happening in education space. I was reading reporting about the US Department of Justice, for the first time in, I think, even recorded history, launched the first environmental justice investigation based on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because of the disproportionate impact of rural Alabamans and their access to clean water and not having sewage back up in the spaces where they live and where they, places where they live in their communities. Not too long ago, the ProPublica released a report and did an investigation of sort of these environmental hotspots around the country, in these spaces where, that are clearly violating the EPA's threshold for, they're clearly violating the EPA's threshold for, what are reasonable or what is an acceptable level of environmental toxins. And these hotspots are everywhere. right? And they're in poor rural communities. Every receipt, I wish I had the link handy to share. But I say to say, my experience in Philadelphia was the first time I understood environmental hazards to be a part of the education conversation, or that it needed to be a key part of the education conversation, and how it started in a K-12 space, but followed people. And the last example I gave shows that when left unaddressed, often the same conditions we faced in elementary school, the same ones you continue to face into adulthood. And one of the biggest questions that people ask when looking to address any issue is, what's the evidence? What's the data? How do you know, it's affecting? How do you know it's not, it's not attributable to something else? And those are always the easy questions. Those are the questions that, get you out of, get you past the first level talking points, but they don't really get at addressing what we need to do to really move these things forward. And so, what would relevant sort of data science questions be, or what would relevant data science applications be to a situation that I just talked about, right? What would it look like to take that ProPublica data, to take that ProPublica data and see the ways in which it's impacting some of the most vulnerable communities, right? Those that we know are vulnerable because of issues like climate change. What would it look like for us to be able to make specific and actionable policy recommendations based on data that is being continued to be gathered, that is being updated, and that is a product and is an output of multidisciplinary expertise? It's not just talking about and getting the technical things right, but also understanding the social implications of it as well. If we continue on this example, I'll skip through some of the outcomes of the project, because I think this conversation is more relevant. One of the parts of the criminal justice prevention racial equity project we did was we engaged a CUSAT in the question of, well, when we look at K-12 disciplinary policies, are there any interesting or relevant or meaningful patterns that emerge from the data that kind of move the conversation forward? But I said, we're sort of, this kind of time out for sort of single-handed approaches. And this mixed methods approach, we're also looking at, okay, well, we're looking at data that are provided by states and local governments and things that are publicly accessible. We're also looking at public accessible data about the qualitative experiences that are happening in these schools, because the qualitative experiences are often the canary in the coal mine, if you will, of things that may be happening, or undercurrents of issues that may be occurring. So this is just a snapshot, but one of our research fellows actually went through and made it and started a compendium of these sort of racist incidences that are coming up and cropping in school. And again, if we're going to address or use technical or data science tools to address these things, the question is, well, how do we do it? How is this relevant? What do we do? One of the first things I mentioned that remains true is that we lack data. We lack systems of data that are reliable, and that we know are constantly going to be updated and managed by valid and reputable organizations. I'm at USC now, but I used to be the vice president of research at a California-wide or statewide higher education, a nonprofit institution. And one of the biggest issues we had with advocating for higher education reform that disproportionately impacted students of color was the fact that we didn't have data to back it up. That California used to have a statewide data reporting system that no longer exists in the ways that it did, and lots of states don't. And so it hinders our ability to make those judgments and to advocate for those. And so a lot of the work that Data for Black Lives, CUSA, and other organizations that are really turning on the data science spigot to address these social issues are saying, hey, we'll go find it. We'll use all the tools available to us to find information to make the compelling case that people know. And this is the thing. This is often what frustrates me, and I think this is where data science come in. Shortening the time between the questions and the answers, because often people, again, those first sort of tier questions are ones that get you past talking, but often people are asking questions that are not genuine, but they know there is no evidence that exists to refute them. And so it's really important for data science to be able to potentially use the power of data science to get around the issues and to be able to take in large swaths of information and make a compelling case for whatever it is that we're trying to advocate for. I want to, as another example, when I first began as a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania back in 2015 or so, I came in on the ground level of a project that turned into a report called Disproportionate Impact When You See on Your Screen of K-12 School Suspension and Expulsion of Black Students in Southern States. And what this project, the highlights of this project and what was often picked up was that 55% of all suspensions from US public schools in that year occur in 13 Southern states. Now, this report was produced by literal manual. I remember we were manually looking at the data from the Office of Civil Rights or Division of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. But I use it as an example of something of work that started years ago that could have been powerfully impacted by the power of data science, to look beyond just the suspension expulsion rates or exclusionary discipline practices and look further into, well, what are some other patterns that are emerging? How do these data interact with incarceration rates? How did those data interact with unemployment rates? How do we tie that into federal efforts around addressing basic needs and food and housing insecurity? These are some of the things that, when in my mind, that I envision being questions that could be answered, data science applications that are just in one small swath, right? Like go online and pick an article, pick an issue that needs to be addressed. And there are ways that I think data science can apply. I know we're coming up on time. I want to use this example. Actually, I want to skip. I want to use this example about start time for adolescents in school, because often the pushback around doing any kind of technical work, research, particularly STEM, any kind of system reform, is it's just too complicated. It's just too complicated. And a lot of times what data science allows is to cut through that complication, or to better organize and communicate that complication, to take that excuse off the table. And it also illuminates the fact that some things just are that simple. And so I offered this article as an example, and I'll just kind of read and editorialize a little bit. So school start times for adolescents. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has been for a long time, really long time, advocating for a change of start time. This actually grew out of seeing chronic health conditions grow in students, and seeing they were connected to educational environment, and seeing what are the policy levers we can pull to not have to generate a bunch of revenue to generate new programs. What are things we can do to dramatically increase the condition of students overall? And so what they found through the research, what they've been advocating for, is changing the start time of schools. And I'll read what's in the boxes really quickly. Furthermore, a substantial body of research has now demonstrated that delaying school start times is an effective countermeasure to chronic sleep loss, and has a wide range of potential benefits to students with regard to physical and mental health, safety, and academic achievement. The American Academy of Pediatrics strongly supports the efforts of school districts to optimize sleep in students, to urge high school, middle, and so on and so forth. And so this cuts through the data science could be used to understand, well, when we've done the research and shown what could be effective, data science can also be incredibly important in helping us to understand the implementation of these policies. Right. So if schools and districts were to move these things forward, one of the big questions is, well, who's going to measure it? How do we? I just mentioned we don't have a lot of times have universal and data systems that we can rely on. So how do we move all these things along in a uniform way, in a way that is progressive, that is not regressive, that adequately addresses the question? How do we use data science to really empower equity-mindedness, to empower STEM education reform that is inclusive of everyone, and science policy that not just moves the needle forward in our sort of national goals and national security, and not just that it's economically sound, but that brings everybody across the socioeconomic ladder and the landscape into all the systems, processes that everyone should have available to them, just by virtue of being alive and by virtue of everyone should be everyone having access to be able to live and breathe the way that everyone else does. And we're literally in a place where people are not living, breathing, learning, working, sleeping, or anything else uniformly. And I think it almost sounds utopic to say it, but I think data science has a lot to bring to the table in terms of asking the right questions, drawing out the right patterns, cutting through some of the BS, and really getting us to some comprehensive, these are not going to be simple solutions, complex solutions that really move the conversation forward. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks so much, Kendrick. Dr. Davis. It's always such a pleasure to hear you talk about these things and the breadth of understanding about the different ways in which the technical capabilities can intersect. So we are a little bit short on time. Maybe we can do one quick question. So you mentioned the Walmart project, and you know, we've had a couple of different swarmed Q-side groups that have kind of come together to ask and answer some questions there. So how do you sort of see the work that you're doing there with sort of disrupting you know, what I think we colloquially call the school to prison pipeline? Like, what are the kinds of data that you think are interesting in that space that could kind of help to do the sorts of disruptions, call the BS on the sort of policies, unproductive policy cycling that we see? Like, where do you see the right fit there?
And I'm going to thank you for the question, and I'm going to give you an answer by way of example, because I think the usefulness of data is, and this will not be surprising, it's always contextualized. And I give an example why. And because, right, we're in a space where we're not just trying to go over the well-worn past, like all those things, where we used to be collecting data on or however it used to be used, will likely need to change and shift significantly. And so, for example, in Pennsylvania, there's a groceries chain called ShopRite. And one particular ShopRite in Philadelphia is owned by a man named Jeff Brown. And Jeff Brown has been, he's known for sort of his like engagement in the community and his like social consciousness. And one of the things that happened in the Pennsylvania legislature is there were significant changes in how like returning citizens or those who are formerly incarcerated get record expungements. And the changes in the state law allow this process to happen without the sort of involvement of an attorney in ways that are free. And so when people ask questions, well, how much, or if people ask questions, well, how much would it cost to implement this policy? Or how much would it cost to do that? How much would it cost to do? Those are always the questions, those sort of like first line questions that catch a lot of people off because we don't have the data. We haven't done the analysis in these particular situations and contexts to answer those questions. And I think I think that's where the power of data science is helping, coming to the sort of aid and partnership of those who've been asking the right questions, but do not have the resources to sufficiently answer